it appears that he seems to have fabricated the whole transaction. A few days ago, we released a car story from Jeff from JR Garage about their efforts to buy a Lamborghini Aventador with some crash damage. And a couple of things happened rather immediately. One, they got a tremendous amount of hate. And two, people started to notice some holes in the story and they started digging, especially on the VINwiki app community. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today and reveal some of the things that have been discovered in the last couple of days. First of all, we certainly noticed that there is a lot of negativity towards the JR Garage guys. And I have to say that the short time I spent with Jeff was extremely pleasant and he told some good stories, but it also reveals something that I think is very awesome about the VINwiki channel, because here, I don't believe that anyone is interesting enough that a huge internet audience needs to see what they do every single day. There are tons of vlog channels where people are producing content all the time, trying to go out and do crazy things and buy crazy cars so that they can create content. And I've always found that a little bit tough to stay interested in because nobody is that fascinating. But what we love about VINwiki is that we can take the craziest things that happen to people around cars, make them into great stories, and that's all we really need out of them. We're not trying to say that you need to hear me rabbit anybody every single day. We just want to show you the high points. And regardless of what you think about Jeff or JR Garage, what they experienced with that Aventador transaction was a very interesting car story. The second thing is that the VINwiki community immediately leapt into action and started digging into what car they were talking about. And within an hour, they started to put the rest of the pieces of the story together. So to quickly recap, Jeff and his brother from JR Garage had bought a Ferrari 458 with some light front-end damage from a broker in Nebraska. And during the course of that transaction, he had mentioned to them that there was a local Aventador that an owner might be interested in selling at some point. And it was a 2016 yellow Pirelli edition Aventador. Now, most of the Pirelli cars were white, red, gray, black, and yellow. There's not that many yellow ones. And so it was kind of a unique car and they were excited about the prospect of owning it. And a few months later, the broker called Jeff and said that owner hit a deer with this car. He now wants to sell it, and essentially he claimed that the insurance had valued the car at about $260,000 and the owner had pushed to have the car totaled, and that the buyback number for the salvage from the insurance company was $160,000. So the broker had offered them the chance to pay $160,000 and get this car, where the estimate to fix it was somewhat inflated. It really only needed a hood and a front bumper. It was going to be a pretty light repair. They were very excited, and based on having already done business with this person, they pretty quickly sold a Gallardo LP 560 Spider and a Ferrari 355 to send the money to this guy. They came up with it in a matter of a couple of weeks, and that worked, I guess, with the timeline that the broker was insisting upon. So they got the car paid for, and in the process, they spoke by text message with someone who they seemed to believe was the original owner of the car and someone who was supposedly an insurance adjuster. And they had screenshots of text messages explaining exactly the buyout amount and how the transaction was going to be facilitated. And so they wired money to this broker for the Aventador without knowing the VIN and without getting a bill of sale. Now, I omitted that from the edit of the story because I'm not here to make anybody look like an idiot. But don't ever wire money for a car without seeing it in person, having a copy of the title, knowing the VIN, having a bill of sale. These guys are young. They certainly have accumulated a lot more cars and money than most people their age, and that is impressive regardless of how it happened. But that was a very, very stupid mistake. And so I didn't want to make them look bad. I think they've learned from it. I'm sure they won't do it again. But to all of our audience, never ever do that. So they sent the money and everything seemed to be in order. And their plan was to take a trailer and their truck and pick the car up in Nebraska and drive it back to their home in Scottsdale, Arizona. The day before they were going to leave, they got a text message from the broker saying, I just sold a Ferrari 488 to a different client in Nebraska that's coming out of Scottsdale. So there's a transporter that will be returning empty tomorrow. So if you would like to just have him bring you your car, he can do it for $700. This began a text conversation they had with a truck driver. And he said, yes, $700. They agreed, and they were going to pay him that, I guess, when the car got there. And so they were told that the car was picked up that day. So he kept them updated about where he was and when he was going to drop it off. And he was supposed to drop it off on a Saturday morning. That came and went, and that evening, after several attempts to call him and text him, he finally responded and said, "Did you get the car?" And they're like, "No, you didn't bring it to the address we told you to." And he said, "Oh no, I dropped it off at this Manheim lot in Tucson, Arizona." And so that lot was obviously closed for the weekend. The Monday morning comes around, they call. In the meantime, they've been talking to the broker, the seller, the insurance adjuster, I believe. They're trying to figure out where the car is. And at this point, the truck driver has stopped responding. And so Monday comes around, they check, it's not at the Copart lot. They just start digging. They send a subscriber out there to look for it. Nobody can find the car. And they get fairly immediately reassured by the broker that they don't need to file an insurance claim or call the police, because if the car can't be recovered, they'll send the money back. Now, this is a real red flag, because once you've paid for a car and taken delivery by designating a truck driver, it's your car. It's your insurance to claim it against. Now, of course, they hadn't added it to their insurance because they didn't have the VIN, but technically, you've got coverage on cars that you purchase for a few days, regardless of your state. In Georgia, it's 60 days, 30 days at least in most states. So you don't have to tell your insurance immediately in order to have coverage, but it should have been their responsibility to file an insurance claim for a missing or stolen car. That obviously didn't happen, because they were told, look, if the car doesn't get back, I'll send you your money back. So after a few days of looking around trying to find something, they say, yeah, you got to send us our money back. It takes a few days, but the broker wires back $30,000 and then makes an excuse that I guess my bank capped my wires. Okay, that's kind of a weird story. That's not a real thing. Banks will let you send as much money as you have. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, they get another $100,000 as a wire transfer, and eventually the last $30,000 to make them whole for their $160,000. Now, normally, I would have expected this was totally a scam to take the money. But since they got it back, it got a little bit more strange. And so that's really where we left it in the story that Jeff told. They didn't know what had happened to the car. The broker claimed not to know what had happened to the car. A couple weeks later, they found an eBay auction for the front bumper of the car that was definitely the one from the pictures that they had been sent of the damaged car and the car they thought they were going to be buying. So that's where we left off, and that's where the VINwiki audience picked up. And very quickly, I got a call from Preston Shepard, who is one of our very active VINwiki users and happens to be an exotic car dealer in Nebraska. And he told me that he knew the owner that had crashed the car, hit the deer. He knew the car very, very well. And he said that the accident had happened over 2 years ago. And that very soon after that, without filing an insurance claim, the owner had traded the car to Lamborghini Dallas on an Aventador SV. And they had repaired the car and then represented it as a clean Carfax, which it is a clean Carfax car, and sold it. And apparently since then it had been traded back in because the car was currently for sale. It didn't take any time of searching through Auto Tempest to find out that there is a yellow Pirelli edition Aventador for sale at Lamborghini Dallas, and he checked his records of the VIN and VINwiki and saw that it's the same car. And you check the Carfax, it was in Nebraska at the time. Everything there starts to line up, but it didn't really make sense why this broker, who Preston confirmed did have a history of dealing with the owner of this Aventador, would have been representing it now to the JR Garage guys. So some discussion starts in VINwiki and on Facebook and in the comments of our video, and everybody's trying to figure out exactly what happened. And once I learn this, I get in touch with Jeff and kind of fill him in on what we know. And the first question I had to ask him is, Jeff, is there anything about this story that you told me that wasn't true? Because it appears that none of what you understood about this car was true, because it wasn't in Nebraska then, it wasn't a recent accident, and this person that was representing it to you most certainly did not have it at the time that you were making the deal. And he mentioned to me, he said, this was around the same time that this broker rather publicly bought a black Performante. And Preston confirmed to me that this broker, around the same time that all this was supposedly happening, had gotten a Performante from Houston at Royalty Exotic Cars. And he had come into their dealership kind of talking about having put a big chunk of money down, which according to multiple reports was between $100,000 and $130,000, and then had some lease purchase, arrangement with Houston on the car that he was going to make some payments over some time. And so that started to make sense as to why he might have needed the money. And as ridiculous as the whole thing seems, it appears that he seems to have fabricated the whole transaction, knowing that there was no car, just to get a short-term loan of about $160,000 from the JR Garage guys to float his down payment on this Performante to Royalty Exotics. I guess he had the money coming in from somewhere else, because that's consistent with immediately getting the $30,000 back upon request, but then taking a couple of weeks to get the other $130,000 back. It's as elaborate a scam as I've ever heard of somebody concoct, not to try to just take all the money, because these guys would have had very little recourse if this guy had just fled off into the night with their $160,000, but that doesn't appear to have been the goal. It seems like all he was trying to do was get this money for a short time to get the car. Now he's got his Performante and he's driving around Nebraska, and I don't know. It's a very, very strange thing. Now, he chimed in, the broker, to some of these discussions and said that he had made money selling the 458 and thought he could do the same thing again with an Aventador, and so he had taken their money without knowing which one he was going to sell, and claiming that he knew of some cars that were coming up on Copart that were similar, but that doesn't really explain why he represented specific pictures of a specific car, and then they started talking to an insurance adjuster for a car that doesn't exist and things like that. So I've got to believe it was just a very, very elaborate way to get a very short-term, very high-dollar loan with no interest. And that seems to be becoming the common consensus among everyone who's been doing the research. So at least now we know where the car really is, what really happened to the car, even though it's nowhere in the description of the current listing, and where the money was at and moved around while the JR Garage guys didn't have it. So lots of lessons to learn here, lots of very, very strange and fairly untoward activity, but that's as best we can understand it. So I wanted to make a follow-up video to say at least we've solved the case as far as anyone can, and I'm amazed and very, very pleased that these guys got their money back. But don't send money without a VIN. Check VINwiki, check Carfax, check everything that you can before you try to buy a car, regardless of what condition you think it's in. So it definitely could have gotten a whole lot worse for everyone involved, but at this point, they've been made whole. The car is still in Texas, and I guess the guy selling the bumper actually did get it from somebody who didn't need it anymore. The story of your dream car starts with finding it, and the best way to do that is with Autotempest.com. Autotempest allows you to compare the results from Craigslist nationally with all the top listing sites. So visit Autotempest.com today, and before long, you'll be making some amazing car stories of your very own.